The murder rate in New Orleans has already surpassed last year's, and the negativity that comes with the killings, once again, making national headlines.
183 murders so far this year and counting. It's the harsh reality for a city whose reputation for violent crime often makes national headlines, including this one in the New York Times. Points to both the high-profile killings that happened on Halloween and a quiet, lesser-mentioned murder just after Thanksgiving. But the trend of violence is all the same. Per capita, there are 51 murders for every 100,000 people in the city, compared to New York City, where there's 7. It's the dark side of the city we have to confront.
Set 'em on fire. Shotgun Jewel, meet 'em on the mountain. Shotgun Jewel, meet 'em on the mountain. Shotgun Jewel, drink from no fountain. Shotgun Jewel, pop off. Shotgun Jewel, fire, got it ready. Shotgun Jewel, pop off. Shotgun Jewel, fire, getting ready.
Victor Harris, a.k.a. Big Chief Victor Harris of the Mandingo Warriors, the spirit of Fire, has been masking for 57 years. Despite its name, Mardi Gras Indian, the Indian tribes of New Orleans are strictly an African-American tradition. Older generations like my grandparents and great-grandparents don't recognize Mardi Gras. The event to them is always referred to as Carnival, dating back to when blacks were banned from the tradition of Mardi Gras. The tribes of New Orleans are in fact the oldest cultural organizations surviving from the original African tribes which were brought on into New Orleans. The tribes are particularly noted for preserving African dress art and musical heritage in the New World. The sewing and beadwork incorporated into Indian suits are all done by hand. Thriving in the trenches of New Orleans, Indian tribes pursue cultural traditions rooted in what is an historical past. Indian tribes are known for their fabulous costumes and hairdressing. It was the African drumming traditions of Indian tribes that combined with the brass marching bands traditions in New Orleans, what led to the development of brass bands. In 1970, several Indian tribes performed at the first annual New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, then held in Congo Square, what we now know today as Louis Armstrong Park. This will spark interest for Indian tribes to perform at major folk and musical festivals and musical clubs all over the United States. This story takes place on the crushing fields, the CP3 Callio projects. Gerald Elwood, a.k.a. Knapp, will be given the nickname Knapp by his family. Born in New Orleans, Louisiana, Knapp will be raised by his mom in the Callio project. Like the old saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. Knapp and his older sister will grow up with many family members around them. The Callio, which is comprised of the old side, new side, front of town, back of town, would mold and shape Knapp as he was coming up. Known for being home of that dog food, people will flock in from all parts of the city to cop out the yo. That 11.5 will be different than any other vice. With Knapp's customer base being the users of dog food, Knapp would have to be just as aggressive, if not more aggressive, than they were. At the time, the length of time given to 11.5 pushers be the same as if you had crushed someone. It is this that would shape the attitudes of the pushers. Knapp would gain his hunger to hustle and his no-nonsense attitude, all coming up in the Callio projects. At the age of 13, Knapp experienced his first woman. Not long after that, he would grab his first tool. Being able to differentiate his emotions from intelligence will be another skill that Knapp would learn coming up in the CP3. Courage, self-respect, and respect for others will be huge coming up in the yo. In Knapp's teenage year, L. Broadnet will be the man in the yo. During the time, T's and B's, a synthetic form of dog food, will be the thing. It wouldn't be long before Sam Lee Clay, aka Sam Scully, will be released from Angola. Turbo will put Knapp in the game with Scully. Being from the Jackson Avenue area across the street from the Callio, Scully will earn his hood pass from Turbo. Turbo and Scully will be tighter than pliers. Turbo was highly respected throughout the city, where we born and raised in the yo. Being wise behind his years, Turbo will put together what was known as the A-Team. Scully would have a plug. That plug would be L. Broadnet. With L as his plug, Scully will rise to dominance from the late 70s to the early 80s. In 1983, L will be found deleted in his 8-ward home. The deletion of L would create distinction between Turbo, Scully, and the A-Team. The A-Team, who would suspect that Scully was behind L being crushed, no longer wanted to rock with Scully. Turbo, who was friends with Scully, would initially stick around. Ultimately, the A-Team would make an agreement to steal cop from Scully, but do their own thing. Scully, who wasn't happy about this, would agree, but would then start to step on the product. Fed up with the games, Turbo and the A-Team would ban Scully from the Yo. No longer having a team, Scully would be hit up in 1984, but would not be deleted. In 1986, Scully would be hit up again and still not be deleted. Sam Clay, aka Sam Scully, will ultimately end up being crushed in 1987. Let's fast forward to 1989. Knapp himself would be hit up. Knapp would survive being hit up and ultimately heal from his injuries. The year is 1991. As part of an ongoing investigation, St. John's Parish Sheriff's deputies will conduct a surveillance of a Holiday Inn in La Place, Louisiana, that was being utilized by Knapp, Will, Rudy, and Ernest. The men will be pulled over and caught with the work. A search of the hotel room will produce more incriminating evidence. Knapp will be sentenced to 121 consecutive month terms of imprisonment on counts 1 and 2, and consecutive 60-month terms on the weapon charge. In August of 1992, while in custody serving his 13-year bid, Knapp would again be indicted for his involvement with the Mets organization. Knapp would be found guilty and is now serving 3 consecutive life sentences concurrently, plus 30 years in the federal prison system.
Street famous.
The Melamine projects, officially called the Gustavo Apartments or the Gus Homes, is a housing complex located in the Central City neighborhood of New Orleans. The MELF, constructed in 1964, occupies 10 city blocks founded by South Robinson, Clio, Simon Boulevard, and Martin Luther King. There would be 4 3-story buildings and 2 4-story buildings for families and a high-rise for the elderly. Being 12 stories tall, the Gus High Rise is the tallest public housing complex in the city. The MELF, once made up of single multi-family homes by the 1950s, the city declared the MELF as the slums, which paved the way for the build of the projects. The MELF will be the youngest surviving housing projects in New Orleans. The high-rise will undergo major renovations in 2002. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the MELF was well known for that work, as it was once run over by steppers and hustlers. In 2004, 3 of 6 low-rise buildings will be demolished after failing to meet the Housing Authority of New Orleans economic guidelines. In 2006, the MELF will be one of the only projects in the city that survived Hurricane Katrina with minimal wind damage and no flooding. The last building will be demolished in 2013. Reconstruction will begin in the same year at a cost of $61 million through the use of $26 million from HANO, $21.3 million from FEMA, and $13.1 million in low-income housing credits. Gibbs Construction and Clomax Construction will complete the development of the new 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom unit, which include Energy Star appliances, which would also be pre-wired for cable and internet services. The new Gus Homes would open in 2018 with 638 homes located on the entire Gus site, 577 of which are public housing units. The story starts in the MELF, former home to matriarch Miss Eliza, mother of Brenda and Michelle Keelan, aka Missy, off the MLK side of the MELF. Passion Cobbins will grow up in the MELF with the men who she would take the stand on in 2017. Coined as the First Lady, Passion will spill on the men who we now know today as YMM. Passion will go on to testify that the men moved work and crushed their ops. Claiming to have witnessed one crushing and having extensive knowledge of 4 more, Passions will go on to testify that YMM would brag about spending the bin. Passion, who dropped out in 11th grade, did hair in the project and would be on the set with YMM. 25 at the time of the trial, Passion will give full detail on the crushing of Deshaun Hartford. Passion would allege that Lionel Allen, aka Locke, will pull out 2 blicks, push her to the ground, and smash Deshaun Hartford. Passion, who was arrested herself on unrelated aggravated assault charges in July of 2014, wouldn't be done. She will go on to testify that in 2012, Titty would delete Benny Smith, aka Funk. YMM would believe that Funk was playing both sides of the field with the 1 tenors. Passion would state that during the reign of YMM, she and her former boyfriend, Jacoby Boyd, aka Co of YMM, who was sentenced to 40 years for crushing Travis Thomas on I-10, were like Bonnie and Clyde. The Rick, Jawan, Brian, and Delwyn would all be convicted following a 7-day trial. Lionel Allen, aka Lot, would be tagged with the leader role of YMM. YMM was allegedly formed in or about 2005 and will continue to exist through 2014. It was rumored that YMM controlled the Central City territory up and down Martin Luther King by the mouth. YMM would allegedly participate in a wide-range conspiracy to pump that hard in Central City. A long-standing feud between the 110ers and YMM would be in place. Coming up in the mouth, members of the Allen family and YMM would have blood and street ties. 3 members of the 110ers will be convicted on January 29th of 2015 in Orleans Parish Criminal Court for the Breonna Allen occurrence.
Absolutely, Camille, and as you can understand, this is a moment the families of Breonna Allen and Shawana Pierce have been waiting for since that May 29th, 2012, when the suspects were accused of opening fire with an AK-47. Well, now the jury has spoken. All 3 convicted on charges. Now, this is a trial that has stretched on for just about 3 weeks now. The prosecutors allege that not only did the convicted people in this case open fire, Allen and Shawana Pierce, the prosecutors also say that they were involved in an uptown gang that funneled and weapons throughout the city. That's why they also faced a racketeering charge. They were found guilty on that as well. Guilty on all counts in the indictment except for one of the lesser charges. Now, this was an emotional time for the family in the courtroom. You could see tears streaming down the faces. You can see people hunched over sobbing, wondering if this is a day that would ever come. One of the suspects, Sam Newman, actually jumped up and started to shout out while the verdict was being read. He wanted to be taken out of the courtroom. The court was then resumed to order as they continued to read the verdict. Certainly, we're waiting on family and attorneys to come out of the courtroom. We'll bring you details as we get them. But for now, we're on your side at criminal court. I'm Gina Swanson. Back to you.
Lot will be found guilty of conspiracy to possess tools during and in relation to other related crimes, pushing that work, assault with a weapon, and deleting 3 of his ops. It will be the testimony of Passion that will seal Lot's fate for allegedly participating in the smashing of Benny Smith on April 22, 2012, the crushing of Deshaun Harford on June 3, 2012, and for being an aider and abettor in the deletion of Travis Thomas that occurred in May of 2013. Lionel Allen, aka Lot, will be one of 11 men originally charged in August of 2014 in a superseding indictment involving weapons and pumping that work. 5 members of YMM will plead guilty to the conspiracy charges and would be sentenced. Jacoby Boyd was sentenced to 480 months of incarceration. Alfred L. Cobbins was sentenced to 252 months of incarceration. Sean Gunnar Grayson was sentenced to 207 months of incarceration. Reuben Root Geiger was sentenced to 220 months of incarceration. Darius D-Man Williams was sentenced to 156 months of incarceration. In August of 2015, federal RICO charges for crushing the ops will be added against the remaining alleged members of YMM in a second superseding indictment. Wilson will plead guilty and was sentenced to 180 months of incarceration. Keelan will be sentenced to life plus 10 years after being convicted of multiple counts of deleting his ops. Kitty will be sentenced to life in prison for his participation in the RICO. Delwood will be sentenced to 16 years of incarceration for his participation in the same conspiracy. Brian Scott will receive 20 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy. On Wednesday, December the 13th, Lionel Allen, a.k.a. Lot, will become the last of a group of 5 YMM members to be sentenced following being convicted. In June, Lot's co-defendants, Titty, Roy, Pooh Stupid, and Brian Scott had been sentenced earlier that fall. Lot was convicted of 21 of the 24 counts against him. He would receive the harshest punishment of the 5 men. Lionel Allen, a.k.a. Lot's convictions were racketeering, 3 counts of crushing his ops in the aid of racketeering. The victims would be Deshaun Harford, Benny Smith, and Travis Thomas, 6 counts of assault with a weapon in the aid of racketeering, 8 counts of discharging a weapon in relation to a crime, moving at work, and conspiracy to possess the Blickies. Smith and Harford, who had been deleted in April and June of 2012, as well as Thomas, who had been crushed in May of 2013, would all be on Lott's charges. Lott would also be accused of spitting the bin 12 different times between October 2011 and May 2013. Acting U.S. Attorney Dwayne A. Evans would announce that Lionel Allen, aka Lott, would be sentenced after having previously been found guilty of violating the Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, aka RICO. U.S. District Judge Kurt D. Engelhardt would sentence Lott to serve life in prison plus 420 months, which is 35 years, to run consecutive.
When y'all talk about the city of New Orleans, uptown, especially uptown, you can't miss me. If you do, you hate me. When you talk about the city of New Orleans, uptown area, you can't miss me. If you do, you hate me.
Before I drop an album, before I did anything, you know what I'm saying? I was a hood celebrity, you dig? I'm a gangster in the hood just having a good time. So when I show love to all my people, I'm gonna get that same love back.
Well, being from the Magnolia Project, people from all over the world, when they come to New Orleans, they want to see what that is.
I'm Skip Boo from out of Magnolia, grew up in the Tyler Diner Coast.
I'm Kenny Boo, you hear me? I was raised uptown in the Magnolia.
I'm original doing the boy Johnny Boo, man, from the Magnolia Project.
2400 Washington Avenue, New Orleans, Louisiana. 70115 is the actual physical address for the Magnolia CJP Public Housing Project. Some would argue that the actual physical address is 3301 Ferret Street. If you know, you know. The Magnolia that was designated by the city for black residents only consisted of low-rise brick buildings arrayed around grassy courtyards, eventually growing to include 1,400 apartments. The Housing Authority of New Orleans would bulldoze several square blocks to build the Magnolia. Frank Pania, a local business owner, would have to move his barbershop from its footprint. Frank would then open the Dewdrop Inn across the street, selling food and drinks to the workers building the complex. Frank would later expand, adding live music in 1945. The new Dewdrop Inn would go on to be one of the most historical monuments in the NO. This is the story of the Wild Magnolia. Before Hurricane Katrina would make landfall in New Orleans in 2005, the privatization of public housing was already underway. Since 1996, HOPE grants through the Department of Housing and Urban Development were used by developers and organizations to demolish and replace public housing projects with mixed-income housing in order to redevelop entire neighborhoods. The Housing Authority of New Orleans has been in federal receivership since 2002, granting HUD direct control over New Orleans public housing. After Katrina, the rate of demolition for viable and structurally sound public housing in New Orleans would increase under the guise of disaster recovery. CJP, aka the Magnolia, was one of the big four public housing developments that were slated for complete demolition after Katrina. Since 1998, CJP had been in the process of being emptied and partially demolished, with only 144 people living there at the time of the storm. In spite of community resistance, the Magnolia would be fully demolished and redeveloped as Harmony Oaks, beginning in late 2008. At its height, the Magnolia would operate 1,403 public housing units. Today, only 143 units on the site are designated as public housing. Phase 1 of the Magnolia project was constructed in 1941, bordered by Louisiana Avenue, Magnolia Street, Washington Avenue, and LaSalle Street. In 1955, the Magnolia was expanded north past Clara Street, incorporating 6 additional city blocks, creating the Old Side, New Side. Taladana would be realigned during the 1955 expansion, resulting in the disappearance of the 3-block-long residential street, Belmont Place. The only remnants of Belmont Place will be 3 houses facing Taladana before it joins with Louisiana Avenue. During the Jim Crow era of racial segregation, the city's main medical care facility for blacks would be Flint Goodrich Hospital, located on the southwest end of Ferret Street on Louisiana Avenue. Fun fact, the first 3 black mayors of New Orleans were all born at Flint Goodrich Hospital. From 1952 through 1978, the housing manager for the Magnolia was Cleveland Joseph Pete. In the 1980s and 90s, living conditions in Magnolia had been neglected. They would severely decline when that hard would hit the scene. Crime activity would increase, as well as the patrol of the corrupt NOPD. In addition to being home of famous hip-hop artists, Soulja Slim, Juvenile, and others, Magnolia would have one of the highest deletion rates of any housing projects in the United States. In New Orleans, as in other big cities in America, crime and violence typically will go unseen by visitors. Most of the deletions are highly concentrated in specific neighborhoods, corners, or housing projects. The Magnolia would be one of those locations. In 2003, New Orleans would again have the highest deletion rate in the United States, with 275 in total, for a per capita rate 8 times worse than New York City's. According to the Times-Picayune, nearly all 275 of those crushings in 2003, along with the people accused of crushing them, would all have criminal records. Among the victims, more than a third were smashed within 3 months, their last arrests. In other words, America's policies were fueling violence and deletions in some of its biggest cities. In 2001 and 2002, demolition of portions of the Magnolia will begin as part of the Housing Authority of New Orleans revitalization plan. By 2005, only the 1955 expansion had been raised. The majority of the remaining buildings were vacant and fenced off, with only a portion still occupied when the area flooded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Redevelopment will be delayed in the aftermath of the disastrous flood, which devastated the majority of the city. In late 2008, the Magnolia projects were vacated. The majority of the buildings were razed. On January 7th of 2009, local, state, federal, and HUD officials met to break ground on a new $183 million CJP community meant to replace the Magnolia projects. The plan would include 460 units, a recovery school district, and YMCA in the first phase. 2/3 of the community would be mixed use and mixed income, with the rest being market value apartments and townhomes. In 2011, the rebranded Harmony Oaks community, developed by McCormick Warren Salazar, opened as a mixed-use community of 406 apartments and homes, including public housing, low-income, and market-rate dwellings. The new Harmony Oaks, redeveloped on the old Magnolia project site, is located on some 41 acres southeast of the intersection of Claiborne and Louisiana. The site is bounded by Washington Avenue to the east, LaSalle Street and Ferret to the south, Louisiana and Taladana Avenues to the west, and South Claiborne Avenue to the north. The redeveloped projects are considered to be a continuation of New Orleans as the NO moves forward towards new urbanism, favoring urban neighborhood development over suburban living. Per records from the Federal Bureau of Investigations, at one point, the Magnolia would be one of the most notoriously dangerous housing projects in the entire United States. It was reported that the Magnolia projects had the highest deletion rate of any housing project in the city, even more than the Melf and the Callio. The Magnolia would have a local crime rate higher than many full municipalities in the United States, spawning a significant influence in New Orleans with its extremely high deletion rate. Taking a look back in time, in 1951, there would be 66 crushings, with 53% of them committed with Blix. This would be from citing stats from the Orleans Parish Coroner's Office. In 1973, out of the 252 deletions, 71% would be committed with Blix. Infamously known for street crews, the Four Horsemen will be one of the first to stomp the grounds of the Magnolia projects. You can't mention Magnolia without mentioning OGs like Jeff Sanders, Roy Lee, Bo Hickey, Blabber, KC, Lester Duplessis, Mackie Moe, and Eric Maurice, just to name a few. The mid-90s will birth an entirely new generation of street figures in Magnolia. The Hot Boys, a notorious street crew known for crushing, taking hits, and jacking, will be in full effect in the mid to early 90s. As the Hot Boys will seemingly die off and be incarcerated by the late 90s, the Dooney Boys will be in power throughout the Magnolia. This run wouldn't last long, as going forward into the 20th century, other notorious street crews will roam the streets of the Magnolia. Although the Magnolia will be involved in several street wars, one of the most infamous wars would be the Magnolia versus the Yo. Fought in the mean streets of the NO, this war would spawn casualties on both sides.
So look, I'm gonna give y'all the real definition of what a snitch actually is, okay? A snitch is somebody who commits a crime. The police lock him up. Then the guy tells on everybody just so he can get a reduced sentence or no sentence at all. That is a snitch.
If you are a criminal in any way and get caught and are facing consequence as a result, whatever it is, life in prison or $200 fine, regardless, and you provide information against another person or group of people, you are a snitch.
Black families would start to occupy the St. Thomas Project in 1964. In the 70s, many blacks would fall victim to racism and unfair treatment as the American economy would already be devastated, birthing many hardships throughout the country. The incomes of black people would suffer, families would become impoverished. It was at this point that crime began to take center stage, with that dog food becoming a serious problem in the Thomas. In the 1980s, the St. Thomas would be recorded as one of the most lethal places to live. Residents would place boards over their windows, knowing that the chances of a stray bullet striking and breaking the glass was very high. It had gotten to the point where even local law enforcement was reluctant to travel near the St. Thomas. Most would be afraid of putting themselves in danger. In 1991, the Thomas would become even worse. From homicides to jacking, the 10th Ward STP wasn't a project to get caught slipping in. In 1996, the state would apply for funding to assist with the redevelopment of the Thomas. By 2001, many of the buildings in the Thomas had been brought down as the new project came up. The new complex will be called the River Garden, which was put in place for mixed income families. This is the story of the St. Thomas Project, the infamous Snitches. The Thomas, located in the heart of the 10th Ward, will be home to many steppers and hustlers. Eddie Lee, Bub, a.k.a. Show Love Like Bub, and Bumpy-Faced Chris with the Burgundy Maxima, just to name a few. If you know, you know. You don't have to be from the NO to know that the Thomas was notoriously known for that 11.5, Brainbuster, Fuji Power, Just Do It, 911, and Worldwide, were some of the branded names given to that Doochie being pumped in the Thomas. It is rumored that the Thomas was going so hard at one point that they would shut down the Yo, who was also pumping that dog food. One charismatic figure known for always being on the set in the Thomas was Ernest Green, aka Servant. Ernest, who was pumping in the Thomas, also had ties to the D. Two other men that were often behind the scene were Lightbread and Tweet. Lightbread could often be found ducking off on Francis Street in the checkerboard of the New Orleans East. If you know, you know. Word on the street was Bread and Tweet at a major plug in NY. The Thomas was on fire. Them dicks used to have the projects surrounded. There was no way in or no way out without running into them dicks. They were pulling any and everything over, going in and out of that Thomas. Christopher Dorsey, aka BG, would even reference the Thomas in his song, It's an Uptown Thing.
St. Thomas got that torture, bags is 25, that Fuji Power nigga, just do it, a worldwide.
This tale of two coins takes place in the infamous St. Thomas Projects. Living that life and heavy in the streets, best believe the no snitching policy is in full effect. If you standing on business, ain't no picks and chooses. If you don't rock with rats, you don't rock with rats. Period. There are rats in every project, in every hood of America. If you standing on business, you can't be low-key, sneak, backdooring, letting your uncle make it or your homie out your hood make it. If you mean it to one, you should mean it to all. Me, myself, I'm far removed from the streets. I'm just a hood journalist bringing you content for your entertainment. I digress. Let's get back to these boys out the Thomas. Jaltheus Cooper, Creole pronunciation, Jaltheus, a.k.a. Tweet, Edward Falk, a.k.a. Lightbread, and Ernest Green, a.k.a. Servant, would all agree to cooperate with the government against James Alexander, a.k.a. Coco. This story goes like this. Their troubles will begin when Servant slung 4.2 G's of that Doochie to an undercover. Lightbread and Tweet will double back and serve 6.9 G's of Doochie to an undercover agent and a cooperating witness. Over the course of 18 to 24 months, the ATF and the NOPD will conduct an investigation starting in March of '97. The investigation would allegedly uncover 850 grams of 11.5. The investigation will begin when a competent informant would identify Lightbread, Tweet, Servant, and Coco as individuals distributing large quantities of H in the St. Thomas. In November of 1996, the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office was seized from the mail a package sent from New York addressed to Claude Robinson, in Marrero, Louisiana. The package would contain approximately 59 bundles of that Doochie. Daryl Fisher, another snitch on the case, would tell them people he was a runner for Servant, making hand-to-hand sales, moving a bundle per day for Servant for at least 10 months. Daryl would also tell them people that Lightbread, Tweet, Servant, and Coco were the big dogs who were pushing all the dog food in the Thomas. Jacqueline Thomas would flip as well, telling them people that she sold Doochie for Lightbread and Tweet for approximately 10 months. She would also tell them people that Servant and Coco were selling for Lightbread and Tweet, going on to say that she moved approximately 2 bundles per day for at least 10 months. Another snitch on the case will be the New York supplier, Victor Castro. Castro told the ATF that on 2 separate occasions, Lightbread and Tweet met with him in New York and purchased a total of $20,000 worth of dog food. In an unexpected turn of events, the U.S. Postal Service would seize a package originating in Target return address in New York City containing 65 bundles of H. This package was sent to Lionel Greer. Lionel would admit that the dog food was for people out the Thomas. He would refuse to give any names. The 11.5 was packaged in wax paper with 911 or amazing stamped on the peanut sacks. The total amount of H was approximately 32.5 G's. Warren Woody of NY will be determined to be the main plug. Warren was arrested by the NYPD in late 1997 while in possession of 200 bundles of 11.5, each packaged in wax peanut sacks and stamped 911 or amazing. Warren would also possess a bus ticket to New Orleans at the time of his arrest. Warren's girlfriend would tell the NYPD that he planned on meeting Lightbread and Tweet in New Orleans. The amount of H attributed to Lightbread and Tweet from Warren that day was estimated to be 100 grams. Total amount of H would be estimated at 878 grams, just shy of a bird. The government will file a motion for downward departure with respect to Lightbread, Tweet, and Servant based on their substantial assistance, recommending a downward departure of 10% of their respective sentences, aka snitching, working with them people. The district court granted the motion. The courts will sentence Lightbread to 151 months and 5 years of supervised release. Tweet will be sentenced to 211 months and 5 years of supervised release. Servant will be sentenced to 136 months and 5 years of supervised release. Coco will be sentenced to 140 months and 4 years of supervised release. This was the story of the Thomas Snitches. Stay tuned for part 2, Real Dudes That Stood Tall in the Paint. Out the Thomas.